Did I get the light down a little bit?
Yeah, it looks good.
Thanks.
Good. And just make sure it's coming up okay. Live yet? Okay, it's live. We got some people tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, guys. We're going to start sharing a bit here. And share with the Royal Astronomical Society, Facebook Astronomy Club, a bunch of them here. And here we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Scott Roberts, and I have with me tonight David Levy. Later, his wife Wendy will be showing up. It's my opportunity to kind of gush a little bit. Okay. David Levy is one of my very best friends. We've been friends for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, something like that now. And um, he is at once one of my heroes. He is one of the greatest amateur astronomers, actually one of the greatest astronomers that I know. He's famous for his 23 comet discoveries. He's discovered them visually. He's discovered them photographically on film, and he's discovered them digitally. Okay. He's also got a slew of asteroids that he's discovered, minor planets. He's written lots of books, written countless articles, given countless talks all over the country, all over the world actually. And it's he's one of the guys that I feel so honored to know personally, and to be able to share jokes with, and stories with, and to have been able to observe with. And so, um, David, thank you for coming on to I'm calling this the Explore Now series of talks. Okay, but thank you so much for being a part of this. We've done a few things together as far as lectures and talks, and you never fail to disappoint. So, um, and tonight, I guess we're going to be talking about this book, A Night Watchman's Journey. You're going to be talking about, yes, I got my own signed copy. You should get yours. Okay, it's a fascinating account of David's life, but it's not always been easy, has it, David?
Well, no, it hasn't been. It's you. This is a great honor to for you to introduce me and for me to talk a little bit about the life that I am going through right now, and it hasn't been easy. I've always been a very shy person as a youngster, and I think one of the first things in my book that I can actually quote from comes from the chapter Early Twilights, where it says that my first memory at age 3 in 1951 was almost getting run over by a car. I was visiting Andre Caron, a neighbor who lived across the street. As I was crossing Roslyn Avenue to get there, a car roared up and stopped barely in time to avoid hitting me. This memory is pretty vague, but it still resurfaces from time to time. Had it been successful that day, this book would be shorter. Anyway, I was always a very shy person, and there's a story about when I was about 6 or 7. My parents took me to the YMHA day camp in the Snowdon district of Montreal, and we were all standing in line throwing baskets, and my parents were sitting in the audience watching the kids throw baskets, and I was at the back of the line waving at them, and they were waving back at me, and Dad was going, "Do this, shoot a basket." I'd stay at the back of the line waving at them, and they'd be going like this, and I thought they were waving at me. It turned out I never got to shoot a basket that day because I stayed at the back of the line waving at my parents the whole time. I am sure that Dad looked at Mom at some point during that day and said, "Did we misadopt him or something? I mean, he's not ours, is he?" Anyway, they wanted to send me away to summer camp in the hope that I, as well as my brothers and sister, would become more athletically inclined. It worked beautifully with my sister and my 2 brothers, but not with me. I brought me and my shyness to the camp, and really didn't want to do very much there. But I was not bad. I kind of enjoyed the place. And then on July the 4th, that's 4 days after I arrived there my first year, they had a fireworks celebration for the 4th of July, and we're all out there watching the fireworks, and it was pretty good for a summer camp. And the sky was darkening, and the director had all of the kids in the younger groups go back to bed. And so our little group of 4 was walking up the hill to our cabin. And as we were walking up, I looked up at the darkening sky, and I could see some stars. And just at that very moment, there was a shooting star. And I remember where it was right now. There was a bright star in the east that I now know was Vega. And there was a constellation that the meteor started out of, and that was Draco. And the meteor wasn't that bright. It might have been about second magnitude, and it just appeared, shot towards Vega, and then disappeared. And I stopped and I asked the others, I said, "Did you see that shooting star just now?" And they said, "No." They all answered no. I remember much as shy as I was, and as not outspoken as I was, the other kids were always very patient and very friendly with me. And but they even that night said, "No, we did not see that meteor." And I thought to myself, is it possible? Is it just possible that that meteor was sent just for me? And is that some kind of a message that I should get interested in this kind of stuff? And then as the years went on, I would look up at the sky from time to time, and I began to see the stars as stable, trusting friends. I was able to look at them, to see them, and to enjoy them as friends that I didn't have to always be nice to, and that would always be supportive. And it was really very, very interesting that way. One of the things we did was they had a night of performances in the social hall at camp. And one of the counselors asked if I would like to actually sing one of the songs, and I agreed to sing this lovely thing that they had in the booklet called "All Through the Night." And with your permission, or entirely without it, I'm going to share that with you right now.
No problem.
Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee all through the night. Guardian angels God will send thee all through the night. Soft the drowsy hours are keeping, hill and vale in slumbers sleeping. I, my loving vigil keeping, all through the night.
Awesome.
And that was just a very special hymn, just that was reminding me of how quiet things got at nighttime. And I remember as we'd go to sleep and the head counselor would play taps through the loudspeaker. It was really beautiful. It was a bugle call, but they did it twice. They did it once regular, and then the second as an echo.
Oh,
And it was just beautiful to listen to that echoing and taps. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that taps actually was born during the United States Civil War.
huh.
And one of the commanders in one of the camps said they usually announce the end of the day by 3 rifle shots, and I don't like that because the enemy can hear the 3 shots. Let's do something quieter. And so he had his associate write out the tune for taps, and they tried it, and they both made changes as they were testing it out.
Uh-huh.
But it was really very nice, and they started using that. The enemy did hear it, they liked it, and they started using it as well. And so by the end of the Civil War, taps was used on both sides, on both camps, and it still is. I became interested in astronomy in a number of ways. One of them was the meteor I saw at Twin Lake Camp. Another one was the walk I took home from Roslyn School one day when a classmate asked me if I had heard that the Russians had launched a small machine into outer space called Sputnik.
Hmm.
It was the size of a kitchen pot, but it was the first artificial satellite, and it marked one of the foremost events of our time, the start of the space age. Within a few years, the United States, Russia, and many other countries were starting to launch things into space. And I'll never forget the day that President Kennedy decided that we were going to, as a nation, start a race to get to the moon. He wanted to do something that he could beat the Russians at, anything that he could beat the Russians at. And NASA was already slowly working on a program to send people to the moon, and Kennedy decided to make that a big, big national effort. He gave a speech in Congress in May of 1961, shortly after Alan Shepard's flight, in which he said, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to sending a man to the moon and returning him safely to the earth before the decade." And then 2 years later, getting an honorary degree from Rice University, he gave a very, very famous speech, probably one of the most famous speeches ever given. I have a copy of it right here.
Huh?
You can see
Huh?
the address at Rice University on the nation's space program by John F. Kennedy. And for astronomy buffs, it's the most famous speech he ever gave. But for everybody else, it was just one of his biggies.
Hmm.
So by the summer of 1962, I was pretty interested in astronomy. I had a telescope. It was called Echo. I remember it arriving one day at the end of the summer of 1960. It was a skyscope, and that was the company that had made it. And it was given to me by my uncle as a used telescope. He had bought it for his children. They were not using it, so he just packed it up and he gave it to me. I have that telescope. I don't have it any longer because just a few months ago, I donated it to the Linda Hall Library of Science, where it is right now. However, I do have a telescope that I got to replace it. Instead of a 3-inch telescope, it is a 12-inch telescope. It is from the company that Scott runs called Explore Scientific, and it is named Eureka And so if you decide you want to write to me, that is the email address. It is Eureka dot instead of echo, all one word,
Oh, I see. I see.
at iCloud.com. And that is my email, Eureka dot instead of echo at iCloud.com.
Eureka,
And,
ins-
pardon?
Eureka dot instead of echo,
That's right, instead of echo.
iCloud.com. Okay.
Yeah,
Not that you delete the echo when you write it. Okay. So that's,
yeah. You have to write down instead of echo.
you'll actually answer your email.
Yeah. Anyway, well, ever since I was really young as an astronomer, I thought that it was, excuse me, I thought it was important not just to read about astronomy, but to write about it. I
Mhm.
called that authorism. It's not just the idea that you read a book, which I still do, but it is the idea that you have to write a book. And a little later this afternoon, Wendee's going to join us, and she's going to explain the very first book that I wrote. It was when I was 10 years old, and it was a book about our beagle called Clipper. And that comes up a little bit later on. But in 1962, I was writing an encyclopedia of the universe. I thought, if you're going to write a book, you might as well write a big one. So it was an encyclopedia of the universe. And it consists of a number of things. And I remember on this one warm August afternoon, I took my typewriter, put it on top of my bicycle, rode up to the summit of Westmount, sat under a maple tree, and started to write about orbital motions of double stars. And this is the page, the original page. I don't know if you'll be able to see it too easily,
Uh huh.
but that's the page. And I made it down to here. All right. I made it down to here when I got something wrong and I tried to erase it, and one of the keys broke. And I had what you would safely call a tantrum. I stood up, took the typewriter, and I slammed the machine into the tree. And I could see keys popping out and springs coming out. And I thought, hey, that's pretty good. And I did it again and again. And the typewriter's slamming into the tree. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. So I put the typewriter back on the bike and rode back home. The next morning, I was feeling quite a bit better.
Yeah.
And I went to Mom and I said, Mom, can I borrow your typewriter? And she said, well, what's wrong with yours? And I said, well, it's kind of it's a little squeak and I really don't want to use it right now. Do you mind if I borrow yours? And she said, sure. And so I went up the very next day with Mom's typewriter, put the torn sheet of the paper back in, and I started right here again
Oh my God.
in this sentence. And I still have, this is the original sheet of paper.
Wow.
And I'm wondering, yes, here it is. This is the tree. That's the tree. It's still there. It's like 5 years later. I went back, found the tree, which did not suffer from the
Oh, so
damage from the typewriter.
tree or scar or anything.
No scar,
Okay.
and the tree didn't even mind having its picture taken.
That's how trees are.
By this time, I was well into not just astronomy, but photography, and really got into it. The summer of 1962, I did spend at home because I was very asthmatic. I was wheezing a lot, and my allergist had recommended me for a long term stay at the Jewish National Home for Asthmatic Children in Denver. And I had been accepted. They were just waiting to assign me a date to arrive. That's when I had the famous typewriter tantrum. But A couple of, about a month after that, I went to Denver, where I stayed for 14 months.
Hmm.
And my mom thought that was the best thing for me to get rid of my asthma, even though it did not get rid of my asthma.
No, no.
Actually, getting married to Wendy got rid of my asthma.
Ah,
But but I what they really did in Denver was teach me to live with my asthma. I remember one night getting up at about 3 in the morning because I wanted to see the planet Neptune in the southern sky. And it was cloudy, so I went back to sleep and got up the next night, and the stars were in the wrong place or whatever. And but as I was getting up to look for Neptune, I would have some asthma. And so after I would see that I'm not going to find Neptune, I would go to the hospital, which was on the site, get a nebulizer for my asthma, and that would be it, and then go back to sleep. Finally, my doctor, Hyman Chai, summoned me to his office, and he said, "What's this with your needing a nebulizer every night around 3 in the morning?" And I smiled and I said, I'm just doing something really stupid. I'm trying to find Neptune, and I'm getting up at about 3 in the morning, can't find it, so then I'm getting asthma, and I go to the hospital to get medicine. I guess, and I looked at him, I said, I guess I'm going to stop this stupid thing. And right away, he sits up in his chair, he said, "No, you're not." I said, "I'm not?" He said, "No." He said, "My prescription as your physician is that you will set the alarm every morning. You must. I'm going to tell your house parent that you have to do this, and that you will get up every morning, set up your telescope until you find Neptune. I'm never going to let you not do what your dream tells you to do just because you're an asthmatic.
right on.
Don't ever let it interfere with what you want to do." And about a week later, I got up with the telescope and I found Neptune for the first time. It was great. It was just this little bluish, starry speck in the sky, my first view of a distant planet. It was so special and so wonderful. But at the end of that conversation, I said, "But Dr. Chai, what if I get asthma when I'm trying to do this?" And he said, "So you'll come for a nap." He said, "But I'm not going to let your illness interfere with what your dream is."
Right.
And I think that was an important lesson. And that lesson actually got me into doing a lot of other things. I got interested in astronomy. I remember deciding I wanted to do not just identifying constellations, viewing meteor showers, but I wanted to do something special. And in the fall of 1965, I decided that I was going to search for comets. I was going to find a comet. Maybe never find a comet, because finding a comet is hard.
Yes.
What I want to do is look for a comet, to search for comets. That's easy. On the 17th of December, 1965, that was the night I was planning to start it. The sky was very, very cloudy. I went over and visited a friend for a while, then got back home. Around 11 o'clock, I took our dog, Clipper, for a walk up on Sunnyside Avenue. And as we're heading up Sunnyside Avenue, I'm noticing the sky is breaking up in the west. See a couple of stars, it's breaking up. I can start my search tonight, after all. And I turned around, started walking home. And I'm leaning this way, and the beagle doesn't want to turn around, and he's pulling in the other direction. And I'm saying, "But Clipper, I want to start my comet hunting. It's a big project." And he said, "I'm not done with my walk yet." And I won this one. I pulled on it just a little harder, and the dog turned around and went back with me. I set up my 8-inch telescope, and on that particular night, I did 10 minutes of comet hunting between the stars Alpha and Beta Geminorum, Pollux and Castor. And from that day to this, that is the historic spot where I first began comet hunting on December the 17th, 1965. I didn't really know if I would ever find a comet. In fact, for the first years, I didn't expect I would ever find one. I counted success not in terms of discoveries, but in terms of numbers of hours spent searching. Within a year, I had done about 200 hours of searching. I made an independent discovery of Comet Honda in 1968,
Mm-hmm.
and this was really getting pretty interesting. And I thought, well, maybe if I could find a known comet, is it that much harder to find an unknown comet?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the answer is yes, it is. But but I still kept on going with it. In the fall of '68, I went to Acadia University, having flunked out of McGill twice. I started to study geology at Acadia University, and the professor there was George Stevens. And we were talking in his office one day. He said, David, one day you're going to have to meet a scientist named Gene Shoemaker, and I want you to try to meet him one day. He is starting a whole new study, a whole new science, the study of astrogeology. He's inventing a whole new field. It's wonderful, preparing for the time when humans will be on the moon. That Christmas, I got back home, and on Christmas Eve, 1968, my parents, my brother, my older brother and sister were married already and out of the house, but my younger brother and I were sitting in my parents' room watching the TV. But what I remember from that night was the little the little lettering at the bottom of the screen, 4 words, live from the moon.
Yeah.
And then the astronauts quoting from the book of Genesis. I've got that here somewhere. Well, and just a few months later, after that, I was at a different summer camp. By now, summer camps had become a very fun place for me because I was actually teaching astronomy at these camps and sitting in the auditorium with a whole group of kids watching Neil Armstrong gently put his foot onto the moon. There were kids there as young as 6 years old, but at that moment, you could hear a pin drop in the auditorium. They'd been there for hours. They had been there for hours, and sometimes, sometimes it was slow, sometimes it was exciting, and the director didn't mind the kids talking a little bit. But as soon as they had the picture of Neil Armstrong on the porch of the lunar module, silence, absolute silence, as he starts stepping down the ladder. And that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. I'm very lucky to have been alive during this time. I was alive and active and enjoying things when humans first set foot on another world. And it was right about that time that I was really getting ready for the most important part of my lifetime studies, but I didn't know it yet. The most important part was the discovery that English literature and astronomy are related. You see, I've always wanted to be an astronomer, but I was lousy at math and lousy at physics. But I was pretty good at English literature. One year I was reading King Lear at Acadia, and I got to the point where they're saying, these late eclipses of the sun and moon portend no good to us. 2 pages of King Lear. Shakespeare's writing about eclipses. And I remember marking it down in my text that it was interesting, but I never got it. I never got the feeling of it. And that didn't happen until 1975. It was just before, actually 1976, it was just before I took my very first trip to Kingston to start my master's studies in English literature. and we were watching the Lyrid meteors, and that's something that's coming up in the next few days.
Hmm?
So this is kind of an interesting thing. We're watching the Lyrid meteors from the middle of Montreal, and we're seeing a couple here and a couple there. It was a clear night. And I suddenly started to think, I'm about to go to graduate school. I'm wondering if any of the poets that I will be studying also sat outside on a clear night and watched the Lyrid meteors. I never found out if any of them actually watched the Lyrid meteors, but I did find out that a lot of them were very excited about the night sky. And the very next day, talking with Norman Mackenzie, he introduced me to his favorite poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins. And he said Hopkins was certainly familiar with the Lyrid meteors. He was also familiar with comets. And he introduced me to a poem, which I'd like to quote to you now. I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discovery, in some corner seen bridging the slender difference of two stars. But when she sights the sun, she grows and sizes and spins her skirts out, while her central star shakes its cocooning mists. And so she comes to fields of light. Millions of traveling rays pierce her. She hangs upon the flame-cased sun and sucks the light as full as Gideon's fleece. But then her tether calls her. She falls off, and as she dwindles, sheds her smock of gold amidst the sistering planets, and then goes out into the cavernous dark. So I go out, my little suite is done. I have drawn heat from this contagious sun. To not ungentle death, now forth I run.
Very nice.
Many of us, thanks, Connie. Many of us, many of us have read Hopkins in high school and college, and those of us who read him find almost universally find him one of the toughest poets to read. His rhyme scheme is very complicated. He's very difficult to read. And remember in the Windhover, which most of us are familiar with, he's talking about dapple dawn, drawn, dawn, damn it all, whatever it is. But he is just taking his time with these really awful rhyme schemes that he came up with. But when he was in college as a young man, he wrote the poem about the comet. And I read it, and I was mesmerized by it. In some corner seen bridging the slender difference of two stars, I decided that Hopkins probably was referring to a specific comet. And I went and I looked at all the possible comets around 1860. There was Donati's in 1858, and that one couldn't have been that one, just didn't make sense. The Great Comet of 1861 might have been the comet. What about Rose's comet in 1862, or Swift-Tuttle, now known mostly as Swift-Tuttle, the parent of the Perseid meteors? But then there was a smaller comet made famous only because it happened to be close to the Earth. In August of 1864, one of Tempel's comets became visible, and there was an article in the London Times that said on Monday next, the comet is going to appear so that its head will be near the star Iota Aurigae, and its tail will stretch towards the nearby star Beta Tauri, bridging the slender difference of two stars. Bingo, I had it. I went to Dr. Mackenzie and I said, I've got it. It's Tempel's Comet of 1864. And he said, well, how do you know that? And I said, because he's bridging the slender difference of the two stars, Iota Aurigae and Beta Tauri. And Dr. Mackenzie said, you don't have it. It's not right. And I said, really? And I mean, I don't doubt you, but why wouldn't it be right? He said, because you don't know Greek. An iota star is way fainter than a beta star. And And I listened to him talk about the Iota star being way, way fainter than the Beta star. And I looked at him and I smiled. And he said, "You're not finished yet." And I said, "No." I said, "Iota Auriga has many more bright stars in it than nearby Taurus. An Iota star in Auriga is about as bright as a Beta star in Taurus. In fact, Iota Aurigae and Beta Tauri are less than a magnitude difference in brightness." And that was his turn to look at me. He said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." "Are you certain?" I said, "Yes. I've looked it up. I've checked it. I've done research on it." And he said, "David, you've got it. It has to be this one. This is going to be the central chapter of your thesis." And boy, I really enjoyed doing that. Years later, he gave a talk at Queen's University, and he got to this poem, and he said, "I had a student once who was really entranced by the Hopkins Comet poem. In fact, I had never met a student to become more enthusiastic about a work of English literature, any work, than David did about Hopkins's Comet poem." And over the years, I began to develop an even greater interest in the relationship, the beautiful relationship between astronomy, or the night sky, more than astronomy, the night sky, and literature. How about from Fletcher, one of the compatriots of Shakespeare, who wrote in 1605, "The woman hater, is it so much, and yet the morn not up? See yonder where the shamefaced maiden comes into our sight. How gently doth she slide, hiding her chaste cheeks like a modest bride with a red veil of blushes." Interesting thing about that particular quote is that on that morning in December of 1605, the only time he could have seen Virgo would have been just before dawn, and Spica and Virgo would have been coming up. But where is he saying with a red veil of blushes? The reason I think he's saying that is that right next to Spica that day, or that time, was Mars coming up, also in the morning sky. And Mars definitely had a reddish tinge to it, the red veil of blushes. And I just kept on getting interested. Part of the reasons that I got more and more interested in literature and its relationship to astronomy was my dad. I think I can safely say that if I had not inherited my father's love of Shakespeare, he would have disinherited me, taken me out of his will. He really wanted to share that with me, and he did. And as soon as I told him I was getting interested in Shakespeare, he also suggested some of the other writers around that time, like Marlowe, Beaumont, and Fletcher, and other things. And I think Dad would have been pleased that my doctoral thesis actually included the quotation from Fletcher, "The Woman Hater," that play in 1605. But over the years, I've enjoyed doing a lot of observing. I've seen eclipses. And one thing I haven't said anything about is that I've discovered a few comets along the way.
Oh, yeah.
But in this particular, on this particular lecture, I'm not talking so much about the comets. I found my first one on November the 13th, not a Friday, Tuesday, November the 13th, 1984. And I found my second one just about 3 years later in January of 1987. But by then I was getting the hang of it. I got another one later that year, another one in 1988, another one in 1989, a very bright one that became very bright in 1990 and was visible with the naked eye, although it was faint when I discovered it, but it got very bright during that summer. And then another one a year after that, which turns out to be a very nice periodic comet. Mm-hmm. And then I had the good fortune to join Jean and Carolyn Shoemaker, who I finally got to meet after many, many years. After Dr. Stevens wanted me to meet him, I finally got to meet him. I actually started to observe with him and Carolyn. We found a total of, I think, 13 comets together that we shared together, the most famous of which is Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. And this is probably going to be the first and only time I'm going to mention that comet in this particular presentation. But that was certainly the highlight of my professional career. And after that was over, I began to think, you know, the marriage that I was getting ready for when I observed the Lyrids in 1975, that was not to last very long. It broke up a few months afterwards, although we soldiered on for a couple of years before finally we split up. But after SL9, I was getting together with Wendee. And Wendee and I were fixing. My mom decided that she wanted to get her son David to date somebody, anybody. And she knew that she knew that one of her best friends, Annette Wallach, had a daughter named Wendee. And Annette wanted Wendee to get in touch with me, and Mom wanted me to get in touch with Wendee. And I jumped on that so fast, it was lickety split instantaneously. How many years it was? 5 or more years later, 1985 or 6 to 1992. Finally, I mean, every now and then Mom would say, "Did you ever get in touch with Wendee yet?" "Oh, no, I haven't gotten around to it." And finally, she said, "Forget the whole thing." And when Mom says that, I take that as a warning. And that I decided I'm going to do it. And I wrote to her. She wrote back the nicest, most pleasant letter. Decided I'd love to meet her. And she was living in Las Cruces, New Mexico at the time. We got together, and I got to meet the three most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. They were Wendee, her sister Joni, and her older sister Gail, there at her house. Wendee and I went out for our lunch date, and then we went back, and I talked with the three of them for a while. And we started to see each other just as friends, nothing more than that. And then came the discovery the next year of Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 and its potential impact with Jupiter. And I decided that, while this is happening, I need to concentrate on my career. And as soon as that was over, I thought, well, maybe it's time to go back again and reconnect with Wendee, which I did. And I went to Las Cruces, gave a talk to her, one of her classes at school. She was a teacher. And that was so much fun. On the way home, I remember thinking to myself, I will never, ever go to Las Cruces again without visiting with Wendee. And then Wendee wrote to me and she said, well, instead of dinner at home. And I said, yeah, that would be fun. And so we did that. We had a very wonderful dinner. And but then I thought, maybe it's time to get her out here, out to Tucson. And we were talking over the phone. And I said, well, guess what? I just picked up some papers here, and I'm noticing a special letter that came in. You have just won a free trip to Tucson. And she said, oh, really? And I said, yes. At the time of your choosing, you will get on a plane, and I will meet you at the airport, and you'll stay with me. And we had a wonderful visit. But it looked like things were going to fall apart on the last day. We were talking, and suddenly Wendee grew very quiet, and she started to not cry, but get very sad. And I said, what's the matter? Got very, not sad, but serious. And she said, I don't know. I can't imagine how you and I are ever going to get together. I'd love to, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to. Now, I think that you need to get together with somebody. If you don't get together with someone, and this was the key line, what you're going to have when you get older is you'll have nothing but your ice comets to snuggle up to.
Oh.
And I listened to this, and right away, I was in love. We embraced. We must have lay on the couch for like 20 minutes or so, and that was it. We had a relationship, and we got married in 1997, and we just passed our 23rd wedding anniversary.
All right. Congratulations.
And so hopefully this COVID-19 thing will be over in time for our 25th anniversary. I'd like to go on a cruise or something with her to celebrate a quarter century of our lives together. Anyway, all of the material that I've talked about, plus an awful lot more, is in this book, A Nightwatchman's Journey. It is published by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and you can get it anywhere by logging onto their website. Just look up Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, or in the United States, you can get it from Starizona, starizona.com, and you can get it. You can get a copy there. And at some point, I'll get to see you, and I'll be glad to autograph it for you. But as I was finishing this book, Wendee was saying, "It's time for you to write another book." And I said, "I don't want to write another book." And she said, "Yes, you do." And she picked up a copy of this. This is a book that I wrote when I was 10 years old. It's called Clipper. And it's about the beagle that we had when I was 10 years old. And we had him for almost 20 years. He was a wonderful little dog, really loved him. I've already explained how the night I started comet hunting, I was walking him up Sunnyside Avenue and then turned around as the sky cleared so I could begin my search for comets. But I would now like to introduce Wendee, who is going to talk to you a little bit about a new book that I'm working on right now. And we have to bring the chair.
Ooh. Where do I look? I see Scotty smiling.
How are you,
Hi, Scotty.
Wendee?
I'm embarrassed. David went into some really personal stuff I thought we'd never be sharing.
And now it's all out on the internet.
I know. I mean that was a long embrace, but I thought here are two middle-aged people look stupid, but who's seeing us anyway? And then David describes this thing. I thought, oh no.
Okay, so just so you
But
guys know, I mean, there's a lot of your friends that are online right now. Okay,
and giggling right along with me.
saying hello. So people like Tracy Prell and Mark Tovey and Gary Boyle and just these people. So Ed Gunther's on. Um,
Don't
Twi-
forget Martha. I know she's on. She told me.
yeah, yeah. So it's nice and it's great to be able to spend some time with you during this time when everybody's staying at home. So
I know. What else do you have to do? And fortunately, David and I like each other well enough that we can spend this time together and have a good time anyway.
right, that's
But
right.
I digress. The book David wants me to talk about is Clipper. When I found his original book, for those of you that have ever been at our house, a few of you that are listening, I was putting some of his books away. He has a special armoire dedicated to his writings. And I noticed this little book, and right now what David showed you is where I took the original copy and made it safer because the pages are all falling apart.
Hmm.
And I looked at it and I went, huh? What's this? And I started reading about a boy and his dog, and it was enchanting. And then when David told me he wrote it when he was 10, it became even more enchanting because if people can you see the writing on, even if you can't read it? Can you tell that it's original typewriter, typed with a typewriter that had a ribbon,
Yeah,
not a cartridge, but a ribbon? So if there was a mistake, you could see where David overtyped. if he did not know how to spell a word, you could see where he spelled it phonetically. And you could tell it was a little boy and his dog in the stories that they told. And all I could do was grin and laugh because it was so David. And then we talked about it. I said, you realize later on in life, when all your books go someplace special, the one that's going to be the most important is Clipper, your first book. And he wrote like he writes a monthly column for our local little Vale Voice newspaper. And in one of those columns, he described one of the chapters in Clipper. And then he got a whole bunch of emails, mostly from friends and family, going, oh, that sounds like it could be a great book. And so finally we said, okay. And now what David has done is resurrect generally speaking, what do you call the relationship between the boy and his dog, and then a few friends that came along. So there are two main characters in the book, and that's Stephen, who really is David, but for some reason he liked the name Stephen, and his dog Clipper. Now, Clipper is like the mentor. He doesn't do a lot of teaching, but he makes sure you're there to see it. And then they come across one of his classmates in school, Kaya, who was going, this sounds exciting, can I come too? And they're going, yes. And then the way they transport from one place to another is through David's telescope. So they look at where they're going to go, and then as David writes it in the book, whoosh, they're there. And it's time and space and distance makes no difference. They're there, even if for us it's an inhospitable place like Jupiter, which they haven't gotten to yet. They can be there safely. And then while they're there, it turned out Stephen had another mentor that came to him in a dream, and she became a character in the book, and she's the teacher, and her name is Tanya. And the way she appeared to David in his dream is even more charming. It's really a child's book. She's a grocery bag, like the old paper grocery bags with a head and arms and legs. And but when they go somewhere and the kids are going, oh, what's this? She's the one that explains what everything is. And we're working on this book so it could be read by upper elementary, even middle school age kids, or people who just want to get into a little bit of astronomy because it's a tease. I won't let David go too far because he's so locked into really explaining things that I'm thinking, oh no, this is the age level I taught. You're going to lose them here. Stop here, let them get excited and go somewhere else to get the information. And he's going, okay. So we've been working on the book, and I'm keeping his feet on the ground. I'm keeping it to the kids' levels and more or less readable because I am not an official copy editor. I'm the one that makes it so the real copy editor can read the book and it makes sense. And then my sister, who's done a little bit of artwork and calligraphy and everything, we said, how would you like to do some of the pictures in the book? And she went, oh, yes. So it's like a family group project putting this together. We have no idea when it will be published or who will publish it, or if we're even just going to self-publish the book. Right now, we're just having fun putting the book together. Awesome. So That's the book. And I will give it the floor back to David. Hi, everybody that I know out there, even if we didn't mention your name, because I think Mark Zatarsky is supposed to be here, too. And Jack, if you and your students are there, that's even better.
Okay, we come to the end of this little thing, and I'd like to end by showing you one thing. The first thing that I did when I joined the Montreal Center is Miss Williamson wanted me to make a map of the moon. And what I did was I bought a copy of the Sky and Telescope lunar map for 25 cents. And the goal was to make my own map listing plotting all of the 300 craters and 26 mountain ranges and valleys that I could see there. This is the map that I did. It took me 3 years to finish it. You can't see it very easily there, but there it is. And that is the map, something that I really enjoyed making. And So, what I want to do is to end with a poem that kind of gives me the direction and might have give all of you the direction that my life has taken. It's a Robert Frost poem, and it's called "The Road Not Taken." And I mean, reading it again, and looking at people who have described it on the web and in other areas, they always say that it's very tricky to interpret. Even Frost himself said it was tricky to interpret. And they're saying it's about a guy who can't make up his mind. I don't think it's that way at all. I think it's about someone who had a path, who saw a path that had been not that well traveled, but something inside him told him to go in that direction. And here it goes. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as far that the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great, David. So, for all of you watching that have not picked up a copy of David's book, it's a fascinating read. He's brutally honest in it about different segments of his life. Again, you can get this if you're up in Canada and you're watching this. You can get it from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. If you're in the United States, contact Starzona at starazona.com, and they will send you a copy of this. And when you see David, if you come to one of the star parties that we put on, which we hope to put on next May at Kartchner Caverns, come on down. I'm sure David will be happy to sign it for you. Anyways, thanks, and it's been great having you join us this evening. I will have more of the Explore Now lecture series coming up, and I'll be in touch. So keep looking up, everybody. And David, thank you so much, man.
Okay, thank you, and everybody stay well and please stay safe.
Yes, stay safe.